edition of On the Town. I'm Ed Edelson. I'm proud to be your host this morning. On the Town is a series of interviews with leaders who are helping to make Southbury a great place to live, raise a family, own a business, and retire. Today, we're honored to have Margaret Miner with us, who has been a longtime advocate for Connecticut's environment, and she has recently retired from her position with Rivers Alliance, and I thought it was a good opportunity to hear how Margaret has worked so hard for all of us over the past several decades and some of her observations on where we go from here. So Margaret, thank you so much for coming this morning and spending a little bit of time with us. Maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to be with Rivers Alliance.
Sure. And I am still doing some consulting for them, so I'm not in cold turkey. Actually, we moved up from New York. My family had a home in Kent when I was a kid. So when we didn't have to be in New York, my husband and I, we were in book publishing business. We moved up to Roxbury, right next to Southbury, and I continued. We had young children doing book writing and editing. Then I went to work for Voices. So I was a local reporter and really learned a lot about the communities. And I didn't so much enjoy writing up the meetings, but I did enjoy going to them. After a while, it becomes fascinating. The land trust in my town was looking for an executive director, so I said, well, I'll take the ad to Voices, but I think I'll apply and before they run it. And so I was executive director at the land trust for a few years, and in that time, the Roxbury Land Trust, the Washington Land Trust, the two towns sued the city of Waterbury for more water for the Chippewa River. And this was it still is a critical public trust lawsuit involving rivers. We had a fine win in Superior Court under the public trust law. We had a quite serious reversal in the Supreme Court, and we're still living with that outcome. The public trust principle is still intact. It's still vital in Connecticut, but parts that we had relied on in the past the footing is less secure.
Maybe briefly mention, when you say the public trust,
yes,
explain that concept.
The concept goes back to Babylonian times, but the idea is that with water, with salt water, fresh water, all the public should have access to it. It's not owned by a single person who can then take all the water or say to the public, you can't access this water. And Connecticut, we're very specific about it. Under our Connecticut Environmental Protection Act, we say water and other natural resources of the state shall be held in trust for the public. And that's the Connecticut Environmental Protection Act. And that was what was used as the basis for the litigation to tell Waterbury, which was diverting additional amounts of water from the Chippewa River, you're doing harm, you should stop. Right. Now, I should mention that there was an old contract between Washington and Waterbury going back to 1921.
This is the town of Washington.
Town of Washington. And Waterbury was not in compliance with that contract, which nobody remembered on either side. And for that reason, the case went back to the court. The Waterbury was required to create a management plan. The management plan is protective of river flows. That case led to my interest in rivers. It was the only thing I knew about rivers. Luckily, it's a key issue all across the state. It really covered about 90% of my job, and it's today the same issues are before the state in the state water plan, which recently we got our first comprehensive statewide water plan, which I know that
Well, we're really skipping way ahead historically.
Same issue.
Right.
Same issue from the issues have not changed, And you're very lucky among the people that have been active on both sides here are the Pompanoag River Watershed Association.
Yes.
And in the midst of this, Connecticut Water acquired Heritage Water.
Right.
So in environmental work, there isn't one battle and it's won and you go over to something else. It's the same story, trying to keep water in rivers, trying to keep water in aquifers so they're available for people.
Right.
And the fight is never quite over.
So I did just want to make one distinction for our viewers, because it might sound like the public trust concept is so intuitive, but that's not the way most states are, especially out west, where water more or less can be owned by people and say, I have a right to that water and I can take it without.
Western water law is different from Eastern water law. However, out west, the state can override, as it does in cases of emergency,
Okay.
which is the basis of the public trust principle. You have strong legal rights in the Imperial Valley, say, but the state can overrule, and that's because they're representing the interests of the people.
Okay.
Sort of like eminent domain. Out west, they don't want to use it very often. We don't want to use it very often here, but the concept even out there is, despite their stronger and stranger laws, the public trust concept underlies the state's authority.
So I'm going back to to your being the executive director of the Roxbury Land Trust. Through that, you become aware of the importance of river law, river conservation, and I assume that's when you first went into the Rivers Alliance organization.
Right. I did not realize how much water could be pulled out of a river legally in Connecticut. That's still a problem, but that is what Rivers Alliance was looking for a new director. Sarah Faulkner Leff had been their director since between 1992 and 2000. She was the founding executive director. So I stepped in, and I guess what I liked about it was somewhat like going to meetings. I liked the opportunity to meet people across the state and find out what their issues were.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first issues that came up at what I call a network meeting was I asked people, how many people here have problems with gravel mines, with people, graveling and taking out huge amounts of the aquifer or huge amounts of topsoil? And about 4 people raised their hand. Still a problem. Mm-hmm. I have on my desk consulting right now a problem involving heavy gravel mining adjacent to a river. Mm-hmm. And protecting topsoil is another similar problem.
But just going to Rivers Alliance, what was the impetus for Rivers Alliance to be formed back in 1992?
The impetus,
was there a particular...
the larger groups formed it to perform state functions. So we're lucky in Connecticut, we have 3 really old watershed groups that no other state has. We have the Farmington, Housatonic Valley, and the Connecticut River. Mm-hmm. And they're very powerful as watershed groups go. But even for these groups, it was a burden for each one to send someone to Hartford to watch litigation.
Okay.
And there's certain educational issues that you want to speak to the whole state. Okay. For instance, Housatonic Valley Association, Pompanoag River here in Southbury have a River Smart program where they try to deal with stormwater runoff. They want that message to be out around the state, and that's what a statewide organization will do. We'll go talk anywhere about the same problem and how to deal with it.
Okay, so that was your original impetus back in 92.
The original idea was that to have an organization that could do their advocacy and their education when it was needed, either up in Hartford or beyond their regions.
So were there any particular issues back in 92? I mean, you mentioned the Chippewa River, but I'm wondering if there was something else.
Back then, when I came to the job, and they were sort of wrapping up the cases, but we had intervened, Rivers Alliance had intervened in a number of cases involving power plants, because the new technology, the dual cycle power plants, as you probably are aware here in Southbury, they do not require as much cooling as the old ones.
Right.
So you can bring them upriver. You can put them in Oxford are Naugatuck.
You don't need the Long Island Sound.
You don't need Long Island Sound, but the question is, how much water are they taking?
Mm-hmm.
And we intervened in 3 instances, and I was working, you all probably remember Mark Taylor, a fantastic leader in your community, one of the founders of the Pomperaug River Watershed Coalition. One of my first education in these things was sitting with him negotiating, believe it or not, on that Oxford power plant. And we were
first iteration.
First iteration, and we were negotiating and got. It faded away over different changes of ownership. Stream flow gauges,
Mm-hmm.
various protections the siting council agreed to put into. So one of the
I have
power
to challenge
plants,
you there, because I thought Mark Taylor told me he learned everything from you.
Yeah, no. He may have said that when I was around, but it was a joke.
Well, I know he was a real fan of yours. So,
and that was definitely reciprocated. He was a great leader, regionally and nationally, for protection of waters.
So you've obviously been with the organization a while. When you look back, where it was back in 2000, now we're almost 20 years later.
Yeah.
When you look back, what things are you most proud of that you've been able to accomplish?
I should mention that one of the early things, also related to this region, we worked on the MTBE, gasoline additive that was, it's extremely soluble in water, so it was polluting groundwater all over New England, but in Woodbury it was quite prevalent, and any place there was a leak, there was a problem, and often we do work with water companies, and in this case we worked with the Connecticut Waterworks Association to advocate get that out of gasoline.
Okay.
We probably, what people know us best for was we passed a law requiring stream flow protection in 2005.
Right.
That was considered impossible. We'd had a coalition volunteer group with water companies, Nature Conservancy came down, Rivers Alliance, talking about what can we do to protect Connecticut rivers so that enough water stays in the rivers to support fish, to support my beloved salamanders and turtles. What can we do? And it's a very difficult question because water companies under a 1982 law have the right, in some cases, if it had been registered then, they have the right to take all the water out of certain rivers. And occasionally they do. And it's not always because that's what they set out to do at the start of the season, but Coppermine Brook, for instance, up in Bristol, there are 2 water companies right next to it. If they're both pumping, it's dry. It goes dry.
Stores at the University of Connecticut, I think.
Yes,
ran there.
the Fenton River case arose about 1 month after we passed the stream flow law, and I won't go into why that has caused us problems. That it was 1 month. It would have been much better if it was 1 month before.
Right.
But that's a prime example. The Fenton River at the University of Connecticut was pumped dry, and I found in our files warnings going back to 1998 from Rivers Alliance to Yukon, you're going to pump this river dry, because the permits that they had to pump water exceeded the amount of water in the river.
Right.
So it did happen. It drew statewide attention to the issue.
Right.
Since it was a state entity that did it, the state could say, you have to solve this problem. Right. And so they have a very good wellfield management plan now, overseen by your water company, Connecticut Water.
Okay.
And perhaps to be current, I might jump ahead to one of the things that Rivers Alliance does that's current. Beyond, what is a brand new issue? A brand new issue is our water companies being bought up by other water companies.
Right.
So in addition to worrying about keeping water in the stream and water in the aquifers, we now have to think about what should the state policy be regarding, right now the active acquisition is San Jose Water wants to, and Connecticut Water want to merge. Actually, San Jose Water, which is in California and Texas, will take over Connecticut Water. Previously, Eversource took over Aquarion. The result is most people in the western part of the state don't realize it. They have one utility for water and electricity, and that's Eversource.
Right.
And that's a big swath of the western part of the state. So how far down that road do we want to go? That's in front of the Siting Council now. Rivers Alliance in the Eversource, I think we're good at spotting sensitive issues. When Eversource wanted to buy Aquarion, I think we were about the only group that protested. It's like, we don't think this is we think you should look at this.
Yeah.
There's some conflicts. Eversource has an interest in power plants that need water and its hydro facilities. We should look at this more carefully. Well, now the next acquisition, San Jose Water and Connecticut Water, is being scrutinized much more carefully.
Right. Well, I think the first application they had to withdraw. They weren't getting the support.
To everyone's surprise and shock, they were turned down on their first application.
Yeah.
And public interest related to the public trust was the grounds on which it was turned down.
Okay. Well, I thought you would bring up the stream flow legislation.
Yes.
And I believe, I don't have the date on that, but
It was
that's in
2005.
Well, I thought there was something more recent then.
There was. The law, not the regular, the law passed in 2005.
Oh, that's
the law says write regulations. You may know that in Connecticut it is much harder to pass or change a regulation than a law.
Okay.
You can change a law with 2 hours to spare in the legislative session. A regulation, there's a process. We did not get the regulations for that law until about 2013.
That sounds right. Okay, so
Yeah.
I was
And we
confusing the
lost
two.
a big chunk of what should have been regulated on the way. Groundwater pumping was dropped out. So that is not protected under the regulations.
Okay.
Certain reservoir releases will be required when it goes into effect, but and DEEP has worked hard on identifying those releases and how much, when, but it is still legal in Connecticut. It's still a high priority for Rivers Alliance. It's still legal to pump a river dry in some circumstances, and we say that should not be.
Right.
So we've been saying that for 20 years now, and I think we're still saying it.
So Rivers Alliance still has work ahead of it to
It does,
not
and,
give up. And
my successor, Elisa Sharamut, has worked on all these issues. She was with the Connecticut River Watershed Council, now the Connecticut River Conservancy, and I had worked with her together in a number of coalitions, and she's very up on the issues, and this is one of her big issues too. So.
Well, would you say that improving that regulation, specifically addressing groundwater and withdrawals from groundwater, that sometimes, as you know, were given in a time frame when we didn't really have the science to say what's a reasonable amount, and we just sort of gave away.
We had the
rights.
Science, we didn't have the politics.
Oh, okay.
We had the science, and in fact, legislators said, "Well, we know the science is on your side. We promise we'll fix this next year," but next year never came.
Okay. Well, I was going back, I think, to the 80s when a lot of diversion rights were just kind of given out.
That's called the Connecticut the Water Diversion Policy Act, 1982. A big step forward in water protection, because to get a permit for a new diversion, either pumping or damming, you have to meet certain environmental standards.
Right.
You can't just. But in order to get that passed, water companies said, "But we have all these things that we're working with. You can't make us go back and examine each one of them." So all of those ones that they could say they had and that they could register,
Right.
and they were grandfathered. And the registrations are a bit vague, like, okay, what was the most amount you ever used, and what was the area you served? And different companies answered different ways, but those things are highly protected. They have been a subject of controversy ever since, especially in the water plan. Again, what we didn't realize was that more than 80% of the water available for supply is covered by these diversions.
Right.
So we have, and obviously if you were a water company, you want to use your registration where you don't need a permit. So you can take more and more under that. You don't want to go in and have to have it. It used to be a really long process. So yes, 1982, the Water Diversion Policy Act passed. Terrific environmental standards, not applicable to more than 80% of the water diversions.
So water flow, making sure our streams, our rivers have adequate amount of water.
Cold water.
Cold water, okay. What about, because a lot of people, when they think about an organization called Rivers Alliance, they might think about water pollution.
Yes.
And you haven't, other than MTBE, you haven't really talked too much about that. Is that?
Well, I know. We worked with, as you probably know, under the Clean Water Act, many of the what they call point sources of pollution, like factories where all the pollution is coming out of a couple of pipes. They were cleaned up. We did work with Connecticut Fund for the Environment on a couple of remaining factories on the Naugatuck. We got good results. Where Rivers Alliance has been most active recently is sewage problems, sewage overflows. When there's a storm, sewage overflows. When there's a malfunction, you probably remember up in Waterbury. And by the way, Waterbury responded well in the end, but they had 5 million gallons of raw sewage that came out and sat there over a long weekend because there was no flow. It was a low flow. It was a scandal.
And Rivers Alliance gets involved.
One of our favorite members, Kevin Zach, is an active advocate along the Naugatuck, and I think he was the first person to call us. The press didn't find out for about a week. Deep didn't find out. It was over a long weekend. I forget which one. It was over a long weekend. So the breakdown, the malfunction, which was a serious electric malfunction at the plant, really, things were reported, but they were reported on people's voicemail. So you can imagine it was the people next to the river who said, oh my goodness, this is horrible.
So just to make people more aware of Rivers Alliance, the organization, excuse me, is still up in Litchfield, I believe.
The organization, we moved from Collinsville to Litchfield. We're in the Bantam. We're very interested in protecting the beautiful Bantam and Chippewa rivers. We say, you can call us with any problem related to water, any question, and we call it a helpline or an ombudsman. And if it's something that's well within the capabilities of Connecticut Water or HVA or Farmington River Watershed, and they can and should do it, we'll refer people there. But many times people call, they say, oh my goodness, my stream is dried up, or oh, there is a development going into wetlands. When is the hearing? Tomorrow.
Show up.
We will really, and Alicia is the same, we will try to help. And as people call in, if you get a problem like gravel mines, sewage, wetlands filling, 3 or 4 people call in 3 months, that's probably a statewide problem. It's not just one person here and one person there.
But if people would like to volunteer, participate, I mean, obviously they can, I believe, contribute to Rivers Alliance.
We would love it.
People we'll put up the website and they can do it online.
There's a donate button, and I think we are the leanest, most efficient, dollar-efficient organization around. And our funders attest to that.
All right. Well, if you will. Make sure our viewers know that if they want to
Rivers at riversalliance.org. That's our website. There's a donate button there. There's also a lot of information on current issues. And if you want to know more about that information or have questions, you can call in 860-361-9349. I think my cell phone is still up, judging from some of the calls I've been getting. That will probably change, but in terms of volunteering, one of the best things that our members do is to interact with us. It's not so much, every now and then we might need something like a big mailing or some standard volunteer work. We depend on the public to see what's happening in the rivers.
Be our watchdogs.
To be the watchdogs.
So going back to your days in New York City, Did you ever see your future being one of the leading environmentalists in the state of
I
Connecticut?
still find that quite surprising. Connecticut, I saw as a possibility in my future. I can't quite get used to it. You know, I started late in life, so I'm still surprised as a so-called environmental leader out
Okay.
of. Oh, you're kidding! But
So that really, I mean, if I met you when you were 25 years old, I would not have seen a budding environmentalist.
you probably might not have seen someone sober.
Okay, we'll leave that.
When I was 25, let's see. No, that was a very lively year. No,
Okay.
Of course, as a matter of fact, I was working in philosophy at that point. When not partying.
Okay.
I was working on a really great book, Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Really?
8 volumes, actually made money. Does philosophy ever make money? In this case it did.
All right.
For Macmillan and the Free Press, and it was honestly exciting. Sort of because like Rivers Alliance, it looked like something impossible to do. It looked like who could do 8 volumes on philosophy and sell it, and we did.
Well, maybe it was philosophy's loss, but Connecticut's gain. So
If the philosophy project was finished,
I mean, you're coming here and becoming switching careers.
I would have had the opportunity to do this work.
All right. Well, Margaret, I really appreciate you stopping by
Good.
and sharing with us all the things that you've accomplished that are so important to the future of Connecticut. I think you've got a career or a second career you should be very, very proud of. And I hope all of our listeners will go to the website at a minimum, learn about what's important about our rivers. Please consider donating and becoming a member. And again, thank you,
And
Margaret.
again, thank you. And the rivers, the issues really are important, and we really need the public to respond and comment as well as donate. But
Right.
any involvement is very welcome.
All right, and please, to our viewers, please stay tuned to future editions of On the Town, where we'll have the opportunity to talk with other leaders who are making Southbury a great place to live.